Okay, ladies, we're live.
Right, thank you very much, Susie, and welcome to everybody who is listening either at the time or looking at us later on. We're introducing our shared endeavour for 2015 today, and we have decided on a migration theme, and we're hoping that a number of you will join in with us in what we hope will be an interesting year ahead. So we want your ideas. We have a few of our own so far, but these are just to start us off. And what we're going to talk about tonight is some of our aims and plans, and this is not just the aims and plans we've already thought of, but the ones that you would like to contribute as well. And then we're going to look at some of the questions that are in our heads about migration in our places, and perhaps think of some new ones. Quick look at population statistics, and then ways in which people might have entered or left our places, a little bit of context, and then how we are going to exchange our ideas with each other as the project progresses. Now, we've come up with a few initial aims that we had in our heads, but we would like some contributions if you think that this is not taking this project in the direction that you would like it to go. Our main objective is to work and to learn together, and the emphasis all the time is on this idea of sharing. We've all got ideas, we've all got different levels of expertise, but everyone's got something they can offer. And the whole point of this is to bring those ideas together and share what we already know. We're also going to be able to not just look at our own places, but make more sense of what's going on in our own places by comparing it with what's going on in another place. So just looking at your own place in isolation, you have no idea how typical what's going on there is. It's when you start to compare it with other places that it becomes a little bit more meaningful. So hopefully by all doing a little bit and then sharing what we find, we can do that. We obviously want everyone who's participating to fulfil their own objectives and help to answer their own key questions, whatever they might be. And also to help those who are participating come to some kind of end product for their one place study. Now that might be a little section for your in-depth report on migration, it might be a blog post, it might be an article, it might be an exhibition, it might be something larger, even like a book, but whatever your own particular end product that you might think of, we hope to help you reach that goal. So that's what we came up with initially, and obviously this is doesn't have to be a definitive list. We can add and adapt this list as we go along a little bit. So what are our plans? And we'll come back to this a little bit later on as well, but the theory is that we're going to provide a number of shorter activities in little bite-sized chunks so that it doesn't seem too daunting. And also, of course, some activities may not be applicable to everybody's place. Some may be just ones that don't interest you at all. So it's an idea of picking what is relevant and interesting to you and leaving the others. We've planned 4 hangouts on air on this topic throughout the year, of which this is the first. There is the option of adding in extra hangouts if we decide we want to. Our conference, we already have date. It's the 21st of November, and that will be our conference and our AGM this year. And we will have a migration theme to that. We want to build a body of resources that will help people who want to look at a particular place and how migration affects it. We've got a little starter, but this has got to be something that is built upon as the year progresses and as you find things that are useful, and hopefully we can add to the list that we've got between us. We want to compare our findings, as I've already said, and we will be updating in destinations, via the blog, and possibly by other means as well, to be discussed. And there's also already an exchange of ideas on the forum. There is already a thread for the 2015 migration project on that forum, and hopefully we will continue to exchange ideas through that medium. We've come up with some initial ideas of what we might cover. Again, this is because we have to have some ideas. We can't have a completely blank sheet of paper. But this is still up for discussion. So some of the things that we might want to be looking at, and some of them we'll start looking at tonight, is what are your key questions about your place as regards migration, and we will be encouraging you to revisit those questions at regular intervals and decide whether they need re-evaluating in any way. Have a little look at population statistics, the routeways, and what are the motivations for movement? Why do people come to your place? Why do they decide to leave it? And the background historical context that might influence those decisions. We're going to try and encourage you, if you want to look at some individual movers, and it may be that you'll decide to look at the biography in some detail of one or two people who've come into or gone out from your places. We'll look at ways of presenting what we find using mapping. And actually this is a way not just that you can present, but you can learn at the same time. We'll look at internal migration, and by which we're meaning movement within the same country, in and out of your place, but not crossing any country borders. And then emigration, which is leaving a country, and immigration, which is coming in. So one man's emigrant is another man's immigrant. And here, hopefully, those of us with European studies might have a fair bit of crossover with those who've got studies in America or Canada or Australia or New Zealand, because it's highly likely we will be losing people and you will be gaining those same people, and perhaps we can help each other a little bit like that. And then of course there are all the people who just don't go anywhere and stay put for generation after generation. And although they're not migrants at all, the fact that they do stay put has an impact on your place, so we might fit them in somewhere, and look at ways in which we can collect biographical information about individual migrants rather than trying to get a picture of overall waves of migration. And then of course we want to suggest some ideas as how we can pull all this together, how we can present our ideas, and how we can share them with other people. So as I say, there are first ideas, and we leave that list open, and hopefully people will add to that, and we'll give you the opportunity to do that in just 1 minute.
And we add a couple things here.
Sorry, Ken? Kathleen.
Just give me a couple things. First, welcome to Kathleen.
Thank
Hello,
you
Kathleen.
for sending the link, Kim. I couldn't get in before.
Okay, well, I got most people's emails, but some of them I still think I missed. Janet, I just wanted to mention on the chart prior to your and chart that a couple things on internal migration. I know one of the things I've just started looking at my place, and one of the things I'm interested in on that now is local migration, or say migration within, say, I don't know, 20 miles or so of my place. And I think what I'm finding is there's just a huge amount of local migration. So I think we do plan to spend some time on how to look more closely at those who are moving around to adjoining parishes and the like.
Yeah.
The other thing, on the staying put one of the things that might be of interest to people is I think there's ways to look at movement, some ways to look at movement right within, say, your place, or within, say my place is a parish, say movement within the parish itself, for example, by looking at voter or tax records, or looking at school records and the like. And I think that might be of some interest as well.
Yes, there is, depending on the size of your place, of course, there are people who move within the place itself, and some people might want to look at that.
Yeah, because I'm finding, say, in a rural place with, say, tenant farmers, there's actually, in the places I've looked at so far, there's quite a lot of movement.
Yes. Yeah.
So, does that look like a pretty good list to you, Kathleen?
I'm just checking or catching up, but yes, it does.
We'll be going over this again, so you'll have a chance to keep up with us, I think. So when we're trying to identify maybe what's in the back of our minds at the moment, and I'm sure some people watching perhaps haven't even got as far as thinking of some questions yet. But these questions have very different levels. They could be very broad questions, looking at huge waves of movement in and out of your places, or they could be very precise. Why did this particular one named individual move into my place? And there's all sorts of levels in between those two. What we did, we put some questions were in the introductory article in Destinations, and these are just some of the things that you might want to consider with this type of question. So, you know, why are there so many families of Irish origin in my Canadian place, or why do a large group of Cornish miners arrive in Northumberland? Why is my place a magnet for immigrants from Eastern Europe at whatever date it happens to be? Or what was the migration path for this one named person who arrived in my place? You might know where they were born, you might know that they turn up in your own one place study place, but they actually could have been to half a dozen places in the middle, and so you might want to track their whole movement path. And who stays put? The technical term is dynastic or core families. In other words, those who we all wish were amongst our ancestors, I think, the ones who never move for generation after generation. And then we open this idea up on the forum. So for those of you who've not seen the forum, I suggest you do take a look at it. And some people had already start to pose questions on the forum, and these are some of those questions that we've pulled out of the forum here. So, how many of the inhabitants of my place came from outside the county or the state or the province? A very specific question: what's the impact of the mop fairs on the migration of agricultural workers in Gloucestershire? What graphical or visual techniques can I use to depict migration in my place? This is Kim's. What's the impact of Bible Christianity on emigration from my place? Why did the population of my place drop dramatically in the 1840s? Or how many of the inhabitants of my place in 1851 were born there? And does this picture change? And there's all sorts of other questions that people might contribute. So Kim, I know yours is the Bible Christianity one, but would you like to tell us if you have any others?
Well, mine is also the one about why my population dropped dramatically in the 1840s, and I'll show you a little graph a little later on of more about that. I think I'd be interested, Kathleen, you're going to have some quite different questions, I think, with your place that you might want to share with, at least your first ideas on some of the things that, just kind of some of your objectives if you're going to look at migration, or some of your questions that you kind of burn in your head.
Mine are mostly going to be with regard probably to the plantation era in Ulster. Yeah. So one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I want to learn more about how my Scottish ancestors got there, and that kind of thing, and because my study is going to be prior to the 20th century, it's going to be a little different. Yes, people moved around in the immediate area, but there wasn't a lot of in and out until probably the late 19th century. Second half of the 19th century. So,
good ideas for have you got some good sources and some ideas for how you can be able to get a start on that?
Not yet. Although a lot of the things I have learned are from Google Books. Has a number of books on the plantation of Northern Ireland. So. Right down to mentioning names of people. So, because on my one name study, I found our earliest, what we think is our earliest ancestor in the records, in one of the plantation books.
Wow.
So that's a good resource for me. So I want to go back and really go through those books and see what kind of things I can pull out. And they do have a lot of information on the families that were brought in, like the Hamiltons, in particular my area, were the big landowners, but there were landowners under them as well. So there's lots of families who did stay there for a very long time because they were gentry. You know, they were given land, particularly to plant it. I mean, that was the whole idea. And they were held to standards. They had to supply a certain number of men for militia purposes or whatever. They had to build, you know, a certain number of outbuildings, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of information in there, but it's going to take some digging.
Just really highlights, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm really interested in this project is everybody will be looking at their places and you'll have different drivers and different things happening, but I just think it's going to be really helpful to learn from what others are finding. And I think
absolutely. Because, I mean, there are things that I haven't even thought of.
It sounds to me, Kathleen, as if you might need to look in quite a lot of detail into the context and the broader historical movements and what's going on in your place to get a real feel for what's happening because there's an awful lot there with Ulster, I think. So yeah, it could be really interesting.
Yeah, there is, but I can't, and I'm really waiting to where I get to when people started really moving out, because they weren't affected by the famine the way Western Ireland was.
No.
So I imagine there was some effect, but nowhere near what happened in the rest of Ireland. So why did people start leaving? What was the big mover? I found one that ended up in New York prior to the revolution in the colonies.
Right.
Whatever possessed him,
Yeah, well, we're going to just start thinking a little bit about the background context a bit later on, and it's a combination of what's going on in the place that people are leaving and what's going on in the place that they're going to, and sometimes it's more let's get away from this place, and in other cases it's there's something hugely attractive like a gold rush going on, or there's lots of land, or there's wonderful opportunities for work, so let's move out, and it's going to vary, well, almost from person to person, but certainly from place to place. Susie, what are you particularly hoping to hone in on?
Well, mine isn't particularly related to my one place study, but my ancestors were Huguenots, and they left France in 1685, 1686. After the revocation of the Edict of Nantes.
Yes.
And my particular family, one of the children, it was when the father died, there was then no reason for the children to stay in France, so one went to South Africa, one came to the UK via Holland, and some came straight to Canterbury. So I'm really trying to find the route that they would have taken. I mean, I know the background of the wars of religion and that type of thing, but I'd like to know how did they actually do it? How did they get out of France? How did they hide? A lot of people hid in apple barrels. They stowed away on ships. They hid their children and all sorts of things. And it's horrendous stories that forced them all to flee France.
And Susie, I wasn't thinking about the Huguenots because my place that I'm studying is Devon, and it wasn't really that full of Huguenots. But as you know, I have a family I study very closely in London that had a lot of Huguenots.
Yeah.
And I'm interested also in, as you say that, it would be interesting to see what you find because, for example, I think that I had recently found that a group of my family came into Canterbury, but then ended up in London rather than coming straight to London. So I'd also be interested in their migration paths once they came to the UK, and you know, where they moved once they came to England, and where they moved. You know, how long did they stay in Canterbury? How many came on to London later on, and where else did they settle?
Yes. Well, I've got several Huguenot lines, and one of them started out in southeastern France, and at one point they were in Geneva. So there was obviously a line that went north from southeast France up towards Switzerland before they then came to the UK. And it's just fascinating to me to try and be able to follow that route and how they did it.
Yeah.
I would be too, Susie. And Susie, and I'm probably going to pop you an email because I would love to know any sources for Huguenot surnames.
Oh, right. Yes.
My, you know, on my totally other side, my father's side of the family, his surname, we've never been able to find the point of it. You know, where it started.
Yes.
It died out, almost died out in England. Our ancestor came over in 1620s,
Right.
and there was a rumor that it was a Huguenot line, but we've never been able to find any evidence. But now I'm starting to hear a lot of people talking about those lines, and I think there's more information available, so I always perk up when I hear somebody say things.
By all means, email me, because I've got every Huguenot record for the UK that there is.
Oh,
yeah,
I
don't
want to hijack Janet's presentation.
No, that's fine. Look, there's a tremendous amount in print by the Huguenot Society, so there is a lot available. There's also a well, it's a family history really, and it's just sort of popped into my mind. It's called A Family from Flanders, and it's written by, I think he's John Peters. The surname's definitely Peters, and it was published about it's published about 30 years ago, because I remember I won it as a prize, and I read it when I was in labour with one of my children. But it is a family history, but it's a family history of a Huguenot family, and although it won't be the same as what your Huguenot families might have gone through, it does give it's very readable, and it's quite a good background.
And James, not to sidetrack, but Kathleen, I just want you to know, if you're looking for Huguenots elsewhere, we had been studying my London family. It's actually my husband's family, and that had many Huguenots, and his our 5 times great-grandmother, something with a Vendôme and forecast and stuff. And we joined the Huguenot Society, and what I didn't realize until much later, probably only about 2 years ago, I had a great-grandmother myself named LeCount, and got looking, and it turned out that they had descended from Huguenots. The fellow had fought for Charles I against the French, and was awarded land in Maryland in the States, in the county that I was born in 350 years later. So there's lots to be found about these.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, let's hope we can meet up at the end of this year and have found out a little bit more about it. That'd be great. Well, you're keeping. You've just been telling me, and we'll be adding more, and the people who are watching but aren't actually in the room will hopefully tell us what some of theirs are too via one of our methods of communication. And as I say, we'll come back not just at the end, but at intervals and say, well, how much progress have you made? Have you come up with 15 more questions? Because that's bound to happen. And have you answered any of them to any extent? Kim is going to talk about population in general rather than individuals. So it's your turn, Kim.
Yeah, we brought this up tonight because I think for those of you who have not really studied the population of your place yet, it seems like a pretty good starting point when you're talking about migration. And that's because population is made up of 3 things. It's made up of fertility, mortality, and migration. that basically just means births, deaths, and then people coming into your place and people leaving your place. So there's some really, I've talked a little bit about this before because population studies are of particular interest to me, but there's a couple really good books for starters on population. One is the kind of the classic by Wrigley and Schofield called Population History of England. That's if you're studying a place in England, I guess I should point out. And hopefully others can add books from other places. But the other one that is very recent is by Andrew Hind called England's Population. Both of those are really good introductions. But if you're going to study a place in England, Wales, Scotland, or Ireland, hispop.org is just a brilliant website. It's mainly for the 19th and early 20th century, so if you're looking in the 1700s or you're looking for very recent migration, it's not going to be nearly as much help, although there is some aggregate information that may point in some directions. But for 1801 to 1931, it's just full of information. I just would mention that we have now, and we'll come back to this at the end, we put a web page up on the site for migration in the members area under projects, and it has some of these ideas that we're talking about tonight. And one of the things that I've put in there on what's called the inspiration sheet is a site for some of the other countries, at least starter sites for population information from, for example, U.S., Canada, some more on Ireland, which hopefully you'll add to, Kathleen. Some more on Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, and the like. But they're just starter suggestions, and so it'd be really good to hear from everybody as you start to find more sources. If you'll share those with the gang, we'll get those put up. Anyway.
Yes, I think we should point out, Kim, that despite Kim's accent, we both have places that are in England, and that is really our area of research expertise. And although we do have a bit of knowledge about other places, we don't have a comprehensive worldwide knowledge of all the sources that you could possibly use for any country that anyone might have a one-place study in. And the whole point of this is that not for us to tell you everything, but to encourage everybody to input their own little bit, so that together we do come up with a much more detailed body of information that is applicable to places wherever they might be. So hopefully that will happen. There's your next slide.
Yeah, and as my accent will also tell you, although I am studying a place in England, and that's where I'm kind of focused on the sources here and the like, I do have a deep and abiding interest in what happened to immigrants who kind of went across the pond as well. So I look forward to hearing. And in fact, Kathleen, my own maiden name is Irish, and actually it was my Irish ancestors that got us to Maryland in the first place.
And I'll get in touch with you about that as well.
Okay, now on hispop.org, this is just a great site, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. It's got just such a mass of information. And so you really need to take a little bit of time just to become acquainted with the site. And one thing I'd recommend on it is there's a really good example. If you go onto the site, just hispop.org, and go into the Browse tab, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see something called Essays. You'll see various things, and one's called Essays. And there's an essay in there called Constructing a Parish Population History. And basically that's...
Sorry, Kim, where's that from the home page?
If you go into the Browse tab...
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and choose Essays on the side.
Yeah.
Oh,
Essays. Yeah.
Constructing a Parish Population History.
Oh, yes. Yes, I've got it.
Okay, so there is an example. And I forget which place it was doing now, but it's really good, and it walks you through starting in 1801, and it tells you which are the documents out there on hispop.org that you're going to find your population information in, and it tells you the kind of information that you're going to find, and then it goes, and you can just click on the links and you can see it for that example, and you can start to get acquainted with, hey, what types of documents are out here and what kind of statistics are in those documents that I can use to understand my place. So I would strongly recommend, if you haven't used hispop.org before, to start with that example and just walk through and see what they do and see what all they find on that place. And then you can apply it to your own place. If you go back to the home page of hispop.org and you go to the search tab instead of the browse tab, and you just put the name of your place in, you might want to put in a particular year, like 1851, whatever you're interested in. You might just want to leave it just your place. Then it will show up all the documents that mention your place. And you can go in there, and since you'll have seen some of those things on the example from the essays, you should be able to start to understand what they're telling you. One thing just be aware of is, I study a parish, Bratton Clovelly, which has a very unique name. So that's pretty easy. But if you're studying a larger place, it might end up having a couple different sets of statistics in hispop.org. For example, Ashford and Kent, I believe it's a parish, and you can find population statistics on the parish, but it's also a town or a township. And so you'll see some statistics that maybe give a population of 2 or 3 times what you had been looking at. And what you've probably done there is you're looking at the statistics for the town of Ashford rather than the statistics for the parish of Ashford. So if you've got a little bit bigger place, be a little careful that you're getting statistics that make sense to you, and that you're not mixing up the town statistics or the district statistics with the statistics for a particular parish. But it's well worth the time, and if you'll just take your time to get acquainted with it. There's other documents out there that give much further context and explanation of what they were measuring, what questions they were asking, and everything. But it's really not very hard at all to go in and dig out your population. If you go to the next page, Janet, I'll show you a little bit more. Okay, so one of the things you can find in those statistics is you could get these statistics for England, or you could get, for example, Kathleen, the national statistics for Ireland. So, what's wrong in this picture? On the left, you can see what was happening to the population of England and Wales. And on the right, you can see what was happening to the population of my parish. And this is my problem, Janet.
Yes.
It was flipping along pretty well there until 1841.
Wow.
And I really don't know what happened. I thought I did, and I just made some simple assumptions and thought, oh yeah, everybody moved to the big city because Plymouth was pretty near, and that happened to be growing at the time. Very preliminary investigation says no, they didn't move to Plymouth, and so that's the big question I'm trying to answer, is why mine did a nosedive and finally settled in about 400 inhabitants today. So that's why, one of the reasons why looking at these statistics, hispop.org, I think is a good starting place, because it gives you some of the big questions you want to answer. And if you go to the next page, I'll show you a little bit more about what's in hispop.org.
Yeah, I mean, just before we move on, Kim, those charts that you produced there highlight how important it is to be aware of what's going on regionally and nationally, because you could have produced 2 charts that looked identical, and then there would have been nothing to find out. And it's only when you see that your individual place is not doing what the region or the country is doing as a whole that you really have questions that need answering. Because why is your little place not following the national picture? And actually what your place is doing is very similar things to what mine is doing. So again, you know, we can compare.
Yes. And as Janet said, do it regionally too. So I knew from the trade directories that the market towns near my place were Oakhampton, Tavistock, and Launceston. And so I also used HISPOP to go see, and Plymouth was the nearest city. And I also used HISPOP to go in and see what was happening in those places too, to see were they growing or were they shrinking, and that is coming up with some very interesting information. I don't have any answers yet, but I've got some numbers at least. Now, you can find lots more in hispop.org, and one of the things I mentioned is be sure to check the notes. So, for example, Bratton Clovelly you saw in the previous chart, and you can see here that Bratton Clovelly dropped by 20% between 1841 and 1851. It's actually, there's a little note at the bottom of the page on the HISPOP page that shows me those population statistics. And it's these notes where, you know, you never read them because they're so small and that's at the bottom. In hispop.org, read the notes at the bottom because there's really good information. And it makes this little mention, and it says, the drop in Bratton Clovelly was due to immigration. Okay, well, I don't know what that immigration is yet, but I have an idea. But anyway, just be sure and check the notes. But a couple of other things you can find the area of your parish if you look at column 2. And I happened to notice between 1881 and 1891, which was another period of time when I got a big population drop, that the area of the parish went down by over 1,000 acres. Well, it turned out that there was a, new boundaries were drawn, and a big chunk of my parish was put with another parish, and in fact it included about 63 inhabitants or so, including the farm that was my family's farm, which had gotten me interested in Bratton Clovelly. It kind of moved off to another parish at that point. But that's interesting. If you look at the middle column with the sex ratio, all the way through the early 1800s, there had been a lot less females than males, which is not, I don't think that's unusual for a rural parish because you had your agricultural laborers coming in. But you can see when it took the big drop between 1841 and 1851, that sex ratio didn't change. And so I get the feeling that probably about as many males left as females left in terms of migration. And yet, when the later migration, I can see that the number of females compared to males started rising quite rapidly. So I get the impression maybe that from after 1851, maybe a lot of the migration was young males leaving. So it's just some things to take a look at, but there's a lot of good information in hispop.org that may give you some ideas and some of the basic questions to ask. The other thing I put at the top was it's even better if you can subtract off births and deaths. So let's say you find out between 1801 and 1811, I think something like there was a difference in population of about 25 people or so. If you have the births and deaths, you can subtract that off and you can actually isolate what portion of that was migration. Now, in my case, Bratton Clovelly is a parish, and I can't get birth and death figures directly for Bratton Clovelly because they get reported with the whole district of Oakhampton. So I can't do that. But for those of you who can, you can really start to isolate net migration.
Yes, because obviously you can have a huge drop in population, but it could be an epidemic rather than people all deciding that they're going to leave. Okay, are you ready to move on, Kim?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Well, obviously people arrive in your place or depart from your place along some kind of routeway, and actually they don't all come in or go out in nice, neat little concentric circles. So it's important for you to look at maps, is the absolute obvious prime source here, to look at how they may have travelled, and look at maps for different times, because most significantly, of course, say the coming of a railway or the coming of a canal, which is suddenly going to open up all sorts of new and easier methods of people entering your parish or leaving from it. And it's also worth looking, for example, at what happens at the other end of the railway line, because people are highly likely, if they're leaving by rail, to go to another place that's on that railway line rather than some random place that's in the middle of nowhere. And of course, historically, people travelled by water because water transport was frequently easier than travelling by land. So don't just think roads, think rivers and think sea transport. So for example, this map is actually a little bit of North Devon, which is near where I live. There's an awful lot of movement between South Wales and North Devon, which by road is a fair old way, but of course what they're doing is getting in a boat and going across the Bristol Channel. So they're coming in by sea. So it is really important to look at different periods of maps to try and see where the main roads were, because what you think of as a main road today may not have existed historically. So it does help to look at those, and you can see these are ones that pulled off the Vision of Britain.org website, and a map from 1809 and another from 1945, and actually the pattern of roadways for her little place of Bratton Clovelly is almost the same. But what you have got is a nearby railway, and if Kim were to investigate exactly when that arrived and where it went from and where it went to the other end, she may find that perhaps that's where some of her missing people have ended up.
Or it might be, Janet, that there were so few new roadways and transport routes that maybe that had something to do with my place shrinking more than growing.
Yes. Indeed. And also it's worth thinking about road transport as well. A fact that I read some 10 years ago, which absolutely astounded me and does appear to be correct, is that in the southwest of England, it wasn't until the 1700s that there was really any transport that had wheels on it. People used sort of sledges behind horses, or they used horses with pannier baskets over their backs to try and get wheels. I think it's the same now actually, to go along Devon and Cornish roads, because they're so ridiculously muddy and unpleasant, was next to impossible. So there were actually very, very few carts or carriages. It was all on horseback, pulling something behind, or using the rivers and the sea. Also look at the catchment areas of towns. Now, your place might not be a town, it might be a small hamlet or a village, but have a look at the towns and the cities round about, as Kim has already described that she has done. And normally, the larger the settlement, the bigger its area that it might be pulling people from. So if you've got a city like Plymouth, then that will attract people from further away than a town, which is, in Kim's case, she mentioned Oakhampton. So if you've got a really large city, that will pull in people from quite a long way away. A smaller town will still pull in people from the surrounding rural area, but it won't be quite the magnet that the larger city is. So have a look at where the towns around your place are, or the big settlements are, and see where they might pull in from. If your place is in a big city, or in a town, or is even the whole of a big city, yes, you definitely need help. Have a look and see what the rural district around it is that might be the source of your in-migrants. And there may well be trade directories or gazetteers that will tell you what the transport routes were. So the carriage leaves from outside the pub on a Tuesday morning and it goes to such and such a town, because you're not always aware which towns are linked with your place. And you're far more likely to go from a place that's got a transport link to the place at the other end of that transport link than you are to go to somewhere where there was no regular transport link between the two. And certainly British directories, I don't have the knowledge to talk about those overseas, almost always tell you where the routes were for want of a better word, public transport. There are also newspaper adverts, and what you will find often is that a particular town will look for workers in a particular other town. And sometimes the connections between these two appear to be quite random. So, for example, here is an advert in a Leeds newspaper, but it's a Belfast factory that is advertising for workers. So if your place happens to be that part of Belfast and you're thinking, why have I got all these people from Leeds here? This is why. And equally, certainly in the Industrial Revolution in England, when there were a lot of new factories being set up that needed workers, they would often target particularly the workhouses in what might be an area that was quite a long way away, and they would try and get the teenage boys leaving the workhouse to come and work in their particular factory, and it might be some considerable distance. So you do sometimes find these pairings of places that may seem quite random, but newspapers will often give you a bit of a clue. Did anyone want to chip in at that point?
I was just going to mention that for Ireland, one of the good sources for that kind of information for a certain part of time is the Ordnance Survey Memoirs, which are books that are produced with kind of a summary and survey of the different places that are on the maps.
All right.
So you can look, in there, and they will often tell you what the mail service was, what the, when the coaches came and went, and where they went, and different items like that. And I know a lot of people aren't aware of them. They're wonderful books. You can practically travel through rural Ireland on those books.
Wonderful.
I mean,
I'll write you for the reference there, Kathleen.
Yes. I mean, we're already between us throwing out ideas, and I'm hoping that the people who are not here in person but are watching either at this precise moment or at a later date, you're going to have ideas like this as well. Please don't keep them to yourself.
Right.
Just send them in, and we'll collect them up and we'll add them to the lists that we've already started to populate on the website, and then everybody can see, because I certainly wasn't aware of those at all, Kathleen. That was something completely new to me, and it may even be something that applies outside Ireland. I don't know, so certainly worth taking a look, so thank you for that. Shall I move on? Context, I think this is you, Kim.
Yeah, so we've talked about population, we've talked about the routeways, so collect up that information, but we just suggest going ahead and starting to kind of put that stuff in a central place. It might be a spreadsheet with just some bullets, or a Word document, or even a written list where you start compiling information or general information that you're finding about your place that might help to explain why people came to or why people left your place. And just start building now from the beginning other information as you find it. There's geography can have a big impact, like Janet was talking about the problems with transportation down in the Southwest, which were really quite huge down in Cornwall, and even to this day you can tell the effect, because there's really not, well, there's certainly not a motorway per se down there even now, but are things about the economy, things about agriculture, if you're looking at rural areas, or about industries, whether in towns or cities or out in rural areas. I know I was looking at a place in Cornwall, Gwinnett, because I had a bunch of Cornish miners, and technological change had a big impact, and had a big impact on first drawing people to Gwinnett area, and then later, as they started to immigrate around the world, to actually spread that technological know-how. It had a big effect on both immigration and emigration. Legislative change, things that might affect your area. It might be something to do with the poor laws here in England, or the repeal of the corn laws. But just start maybe some sort of template where you're just jotting down and keeping track in some form of these things that you'll stumble upon along the way. And we're hoping then by the end of the year we'll all have quite a much deeper understanding of kind of the context or the setting for our places that might influence these sorts of decisions.
Yes, I think it's very important to have an idea about what's going on, because if you've suddenly had a major employer like a factory close down, that is clearly going to be highly likely to lead to a lot of people leaving your place. So if you're not aware that that happened, you're not going to understand what's going on as regards changes in population. Sorry, Susie, did you want to say something? I think I interrupted you.
No, sorry, I wasn't.
Okay, feel free.
No, sorry, it was just me typing.
The other thing that's important to look at, and it goes along with the context really, is what is encouraging people to move. We've called these migration drivers, and I've already referred to this idea of some things push you away from a place and other things attract you towards a place, and often a move is a combination of those two factors, but it is important to have a look at those and why people might have moved. And this really comes down almost not just to a group of people, but almost at an individual level. And why are people moving? You know, are they moving for economic reasons, in order to get a job, in order to get a better job? Are they moving for educational reasons? Well, we tend to do that more now when we go away to university, and that's a move and we don't come back again. But people did do that in the past. For example, an apprenticeship could be seen as educational, and people might move to do that. And then people move for family reasons, so you might move to be with other members of your family. And if you've done a little bit of work about migration, you'll probably find within family histories, for example, groups of siblings or cousins move from place A to place B, maybe all together or maybe in a series of steps. So one goes, and then a little bit later, as a chain of migration, another one follows on. And of course people move to get away from their families as well, but and people move just because they want to. I think historically that was a luxury, but people did have a certain amount of personal choice, not perhaps in whether they moved, but precisely where they moved to. And we've mentioned the religious motivation, and certainly if you're looking at people leaving England, particularly for the United States, you tend to think of the 17th century Puritan emigrations or immigrations, depending which side of the Atlantic you're on. But there are other religious movements going on. The Huguenot migration, which we've already mentioned, or emigration or immigration, was quite largely a religious driver. So that's worth thinking about. And then, of course, there are
another category.
Yeah. Yes.
Some of my ne'er-do-wells were transported
Well, just hang
to the
on,
other side of the world.
Hang on just for a moment, Susie, because we might even get there.
Okay.
I mean, political refugees, there are waves of refugees throughout history going from place A to place B, and then the avoiding natural disaster. And Kathleen mentioned the famine in Ireland, and of course that's a prime example leading to people not only going from Ireland to England, but predominantly Ireland to the United States. And there's your escaping justice, Susie, which almost counts as transportation. I mean, either people trying to move and hide, or of course people being forcibly moved, but through transportation. And it's a form of migration, of course, and fortunately does tend to leave a few nice records behind it. So we're going to encourage people, particularly, I mean, you may not want to look at migration at an individual personal level in your place. You may just be concerned with overall movement in and out and groups of people coming in and out. But if you are looking at it in anything like a family level or an individual level, you want to be thinking of these sorts of things as to why people might have moved, because actually that can help you work out where they might have gone or where they might have come from. Right, we need to think a little bit about how we are going to do all this sharing. So Kim's going to just suggest some things we might or might not want to do.
Yeah, a couple things, and we mentioned some of these at the beginning. We've got a forum going, and I hope that folks will, share their findings as they go along, or their questions, or their resources and thoughts on the forum, and we can keep that as an ongoing place to just share ideas. We mentioned that we'll have a hangout once a quarter with one of the topics wherever we are along in the sequence at that point. And I have a feeling, Janet, will probably be putting out new ideas maybe once every 2 months, probably a little bit more often than each quarter, but we'll have a hangout each quarter. We have put a web page up. I mentioned that it's in the members area under projects, and on that web page right now there's some starter stuff. There's some of the things we've talked about tonight, like using getting your population statistics, doing the Routeways, thinking about your the motivation for migration and the like. So some suggestions there just to get folks started thinking about migration to their place. We also, I've sent the people that I've heard from on the forum so far, I've sent an invitation to, I've set up a folder on the Google Drive, so I haven't put anything in the folder yet, but I'm going to do that pretty quickly. And we can use that if people want to just kind of keep track of, for example, what you're finding out about, the context of your place, or as you start to identify your motivation for migration, and you can put kind of your ongoing draft type material and just share that with others, because it'll make others think. Like earlier, there was somebody had put on the forum, they said they wanted to find out what happened at the mock fairs, the effect of the mock fairs in Gloucestershire. I think those are to do with when they hired farm servants and the like, and I thought, well, I never thought about that, but that would be very interesting for my place, because Devon actually had farm servants, was probably one of the places that had them latest into the 19th century. So just to share your ongoing activity and what you're finding about your place on that Google Drive would be really helpful. And anybody who's not used to that Google Drive, it's not hard, but just send me a note and I'll make sure that you understand how to use that. Janet said we'll do destination articles, and the best articles will be when it comes from the participants on the project. From everybody of the things you're finding or the things you're finding helpful or new discoveries and the like would be most welcome. And then we'll have our conference in November. And on the next page, just a couple of other questions, I guess. We'll have the Hangouts once a quarter, because there's other subjects to cover in the Hangouts besides migration through the year, but we'll have those once a quarter. But maybe I'll put it on the forum to see if folks would welcome, say, a monthly chat, say, for a chat room or Hangout, and see if we want to keep in touch a little more often than once a quarter. Say each month, just get together for an hour-long chat and see how things are going and swap ideas. So I'll put that on the forum. You might think about that. I don't know, Susie and Kathleen, if you have any initial view.
Sorry, Kim, can you just repeat the question?
On if we might want a monthly chat or a monthly, say through a chat room or a monthly hangout separately on migration, or if we think that quarterly will be sufficient.
It's difficult to tell at the moment. I don't feel strongly one way or another.
Okay.
What about you, Kathleen?
I don't either. I think, I think maybe it'll shake out the way it is. If people start asking for more communication or whatever.
Yeah, I'll put that on the forum, and if people want to have some ideas on it. Another thing I thought about is we put up an initial web page with just some ideas. It's got an inspiration sheet with some starter ideas, and we'll put in new additional inspiration sheets as we go along through the year. It's got some great resource lists, starter resource lists that Janet put together with books and websites. And I know people like you, Kathleen, who go in other countries, and we'll definitely want to hear from folks, to add to that. So we'll keep up with that. It's also got Janet had a timeline, at least for England migration, of key waves of immigration into England, and we put that up there, and others may have that sort of thing for the regions that they're studying. But we might want to consider as well, if people want to have their own web page on migration to their place, or if they want to have links out to their website or other places that they're storing that information. So again, I'll put that on the forum, and we'll see if people want to do that, but that'd be perfectly fine. And then if you have other ideas about how we're going to stay in touch and how we're going to learn together, I think is the thing that Janet and I are hoping the most, is that there'll be a good interchange here. But we would welcome any other ideas you guys have on that.
I think one thing we may want to consider is possibly having hangouts, I mean not necessarily on-air hangouts, but hangouts at different times of day, because I know one of our members in Australia was very, very keen to be here at the moment, and she may be listening in her pyjamas, I have no idea. But we started at 5:30 in the morning for her, and I did say I thought it was a bit above and beyond the call of duty, and I'll probably let her off if she watched it afterwards. So we can certainly consider altering the time of day. It would probably have to be evening for Australia and New Zealand, early morning for Europe, rather than it's past my bedtime now. So
I think different days as well might help.
Yes,
Friday nights tends to be people going out nights, doesn't it?
You lead a more exciting life than I do, Susie.
I was just going to say
that's why I'm here.
I believe we're going to have some participants in North America with North American studies too.
That's right.
So consider that as well.
Yes. Yes.
So
and then there's East Coast and West Coast.
Exactly. Yes. And we are trying to include everybody, and we're not a British society, we are a worldwide society, and it's important that we give everybody in different parts of the world a chance, but there isn't an ideal time that can catch everybody, and we know that. So we are going to have to chop and change a little bit. I mean, the quarterly hangouts that we've mentioned, they will probably stay at this sort of time of day, but there's nothing to stop us adding in extras. That's the end of our slide, but it doesn't have to be the end of our discussion. So, I
just add, Janet, that I'll go ahead and start a stream on the forum on exchanging ideas and just see what folks have to say. And I think that your point on the different times for folks is really an important one.
Right, and if a group of people want to have an impromptu hangout, if they could just keep track of any special things that come up, and extra sources or ideas that they have, that kind of thing, and just kind of make a list and share it. That would be worthwhile.
Susie, I don't know, you know, we've got these little groups within our Google community. Would there be any benefit to creating a subgroup of people who are participating in this project and who are willing to do some, because in that way certainly you would at least be able to contact just those people with details if you wanted to, or in the form of some kind of
I could create
chat.
I could try that and see what happens.
We'll have to think. It'd be worth thinking about.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
I'd add from there too. Where we leave it tonight is if you'll go to that inspiration sheet in the members forum, that has all the key kind of areas that we talked about tonight for suggestions for getting started. Obviously, you know, people will have different objectives and the like, but the basic things of at least jotting down your key objectives and stuff should be in common. So please take a look at that inspiration sheet, and if anybody wants to change anything out there too, just shoot us a note. No problem whatsoever.
And I think too, people have obviously got their own timescales and their own amount of available time to do this. Our intention was, if you're going to start now and finish at the end of 2015, that inspiration sheet would represent approximately 2 months of your time. So we're looking at, you know, middle to end of March that would take you up until then. But obviously, if you want to do it all tomorrow, feel free. You won't do anything else tomorrow. Or if you want to take 3 years over it, you know, that there are no rules. But in terms of achieving something by the end of 2015 and keeping up with everything, it's roughly 2 months worth. I think that's what we envisaged. Right. Well, if everybody's happy, I would like to thank everybody for participating. I can't see any of you actually, but those who I know are in the room and those who I can't see, and just do let us know what you want and how you want us to go with this. Kim and I did a certain amount of initial planning, obviously, in order to be able to do tonight, and although we have got vague ideas of what happens next, so it's not going to be a total surprise to us, we wanted to keep it flexible to allow other people to input as well.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Do you want to turn the slide off and come back to us?
Well, I can do, yes.
And I wanted to mention, by the way, that I forgot this was being recorded, and if anybody wondered why I was bopping around in my chair a while back, my little bird had gotten between my chair and my table, and I was trying to rescue him.
I hope you succeeded, Kathleen.
Yes, he finally scooted out, and but he was really stuck, and I was going to have to get up and move my chair. And the last time I was talking to Tessa on a hangout one day, and at the end of it, after she turned the recording off, he flew across the room and landed on my head. And that really gave her a laugh to go off with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, on that note,
shall I turn the broadcast? Just tell me when you want to turn the broadcast off.
Yes, I will. I've just noticed in the chat window, now I can see it, that we've had a message in from Alex, who's watching on YouTube because she can't manage to get into the room for technical reasons, and she said, one migration driver affecting my place was government policy on emigration. I have a group of 24 residents from my place in England who emigrated to Australia in 1848, paid for by the Australian government, and I'd not come across that before. I've certainly come across assisted emigration schemes where people want to get rid of some of their population usually the population that are costing the overseers of the poor rather a lot of money, and let's get them off the poor rate forever and send them to Australia. So yes, there are actually government moves, and of course equally in what we call the colonies, there were moves for settlement. For example, I can think of the Canada Company that particularly had campaigns to encourage people to come out from Britain to Canada to colonise parts of Canada. So that's a good point. Right, Susie. Sorry, Kim.
I had miners from Gwinnett who just went out on assisted migration to Australia with private employers out there.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some from Pennsylvania as well. There were so many miners that came from Wales and England.
Yep.
I mean, certainly, as far as the southwest of England is concerned, as our mining was declining, mining in places like South Africa and South America was looking for people with expertise, and of course the two fitted together very nicely, so you get that move from one to the other. But that's the sort of thing we need to be aware of, because that starts to make sense of what's going on in some of our places, and I'm really hoping that we are going to be able to help each other, and particularly, as I said earlier, the places that are losing people, someone somewhere is gaining those people, and if we can team up with someone on the other side of the migration path, hopefully we will be able to help each other.
That would really be useful.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay, Susie, I think we can say good night or good morning or whatever time of day it is to each other now, and you can take it off the live stream, and I'll just say thank you very much.
Closing down.
Thank you.